start the next round here, the panel session. So, Brian, would you like to step up onto stage? We'll just get him. He's an indefatigable human dynamo. Can you just come and grab a seat just there? That's fantastic. We've got two more people. So you've already met Chris, you met Brian. We've got two more experts, and I'd like to introduce the first one here, and that's Andrew Mahaffey. He's the Director, New South Wales HMI Technologies. Andrew is a professional engineer who's over 30 years' experience in ITS, Intelligent Transport Systems. He's led the successful initiation, development and deployment of a broad range of major high-profile advanced technology solutions for road-based public transport in Australia and internationally. Now, you've got it's a pretty long CV, so I'll cut it short. But the thing is, if you go to Sydney, it's you at Sydney Olympic Park, isn't it? You get out to Sydney Olympic Park, they've got this driverless bus going around already. One of the key problems you had, isn't it, that you've actually had ruts in the road. It was so accurate, the bus was building ruts from the tyres from going over exactly this. So that's interesting challenges. But I'm honoured to have you here, so please put your hands to Andrew. Thanks. For Andrew. I'm just quoting what Michael Tilt told me the other day. You thought I couldn't remember, didn't you? Okay, last but not least on the panel is Michelle Kramer, Principal Urban Design Leader. Now, Michelle is a highly qualified urban designer, architect and business leader, as well as a Fulbright, Knox and Heslett scholar. She brings an impeccable combination of leadership, property industry experience, research, development and innovation to city making. Michelle's a well-known thought leader amongst her peers. Now, surprisingly, when I was at UDIA, we did this thing called City Life, and today we've got 2 out of the 3 prize winners. So Brian actually won one of the prizes, MacroPlan, and Michelle, you also did the same. So Michelle's here going to be talking about data from the perspective of Lendlease, but can you please put your hands together for Michelle Kramer? So as is normally the case, I get all these questions written for me. I'm not going to ask one of them. All right, so let's just let this free flow. So I hope you didn't pay too much attention to it, Andrew. It's not, I don't ask him. So this morning I went out, so I'll throw this one to you, Michelle, to start. So we went out to meet Campbell Hannon from Mirvac, and he was talking about data. So the buildings he had, you know, like they know how much power their lifts use. You go into the building, you can find everything out about it. The problem he's got is, well, how do I own it? Like, what do I do with all this information in the building? Who controls it? Like, you'd be surprised, a lot of the lift contracts that have been written over the last 30 years, the actual lift providers own all that information. It's interesting, like Brian did some research as well, and I got down to the unit level data in your research, and every planner will tell you need to get more jobs to where people live. That's actually not what people want. So the questions that you asked in your commuter survey, they came out and it said, what do you want from where you live? And they said, peace and quiet, open space. What do you want from where you work? And the people are going, hustle, bustle, access to shops, totally different. So as a planner, it would be very difficult to ensure they wanted totally different things. And what you worked out is people make life decisions based on, or commuter decisions as well, based on their future income potential and earning potential. So they might start in Penrith, for instance. So they work and they'll come in. They keep moving in through different houses to get closer into the city because it's where they're going to make most of the money. But anyway, it's not what we're talking about here today. So, but in, data. So Andrew, you're probably in the same space at the moment. Your buses are really exciting, by the way, from what I can hear, and I wish them all the best. I think it is the real solution. But what are you collecting data? How are you using it? And what sort of information are you tapping into?
Yeah, well, certainly automated vehicles will collect phenomenal amounts of data. At the moment, though, most of that data is fairly self-contained within the vehicles themselves. The actual vehicle manufacturers would be essentially the custodians of this data, but it's in a very proprietary form at present. But as we move forward with automated vehicles, they need to become far more connected, and when that happens, they will need to be sharing data amongst each other a lot more, and that's when you really need solid international standards around how that all happens. Also, the ownership of data is an interesting debate. We had one of these intelligent transport systems conferences about a year ago when there was a representative from BMW. I'm not sure if there's anyone from BMW here today, but they were very, very clear that any data collected by their vehicles was theirs. Whereas others in the audience were saying, well, no, it actually should belong to the owner of the vehicle. And there's a whole bunch of privacy issues, of course, as well around that space. So, I think it kind of gets a bit confused because some data is really only relevant to the vehicle manufacturer in improving their product. But when it starts becoming something personal that they can then identify people and things like that, that's when it becomes a different issue. But certainly automated vehicles, in summary, will provide huge amounts of data for us to do all sorts of things like better town planning, better provision of transport services and all sorts of things.
So I was watching what Andrew Constance was saying the other day, and he came out talking about how he's going to give free transport to transport hubs, so like railways, and what he was proposing, or railway stations, he's proposing to use your sort of technology. I don't know whether he didn't mention your company, but you know, is that where you think these buses and this technology will, is it just for that sort of connectivity, or is it for long haul routes? Because the guys out here at the Wilton Priority Precinct, they'll all be sitting there thinking this is a godsend.
Well, this is a bit of an ongoing debate, and it resonates quite well with Brian's discussion earlier about whether or not we'll have much worse traffic congestion. Ideally, the model that we would like to achieve is that the type of vehicles that we've got out at Olympic Park at the moment will provide a first and last mile service to more of a trunk service in the network, maybe your heavy rail, metro rail, that sort of thing. The fear is that people will get very comfortable in this nice, cushy vehicle that comes and picks me up from home, and they won't want to get out of it, and they'll want to keep going the whole way into their final destination. So the challenge for the people who are promoting the things like mobility as a service is to find out how they can make it attractive enough to people to actually get out of that vehicle and onto the trunk services. And whether that's a cost incentive or whether it's a convenience incentive, I don't know, but it needs to be done somehow. Otherwise, we will end up with horrible situations.
But why would you take a bus? So if you actually can have your own individual car, like, we won't be owning them, right? Well, it's sort of like we'll be hiring them.
Well, no, look,
Why are they going for a bus?
My personal view is that the whole ownership and electrification and automation issues are three separate issues, and they're not necessarily completely aligned with each other. You can have one without the other. You can have electrification without automated vehicles, etc. But and I think it's largely a cultural thing too. I think for us in Australia, and also maybe for the US, it's quite common to use our own vehicle. So we'll be more reluctant to get out of our nice, comfortable automated vehicle. But for many other parts of the world, very, very used to catching public transport, and it won't be anything different to them, I don't think.
We had an engineer, she's a railway engineer, speaking at our infrastructure event last week in Melbourne. She said, I've loved rail all my life, I've been part of it. She said, don't invest in it anymore.
Right.
She said, it's all over Red Rover. In terms of making the big investments, she said, you need to look at rubber on the road. That's the place that's going to make the big difference. So, Brian, over to you, mate. Well, I'm going to ask you a different question. It's not going to be on cars necessarily. What does this mean for the property industry? Like, what does this car stuff, what does it mean? Does it mean that we can start to build more on the fringes or in greenfields? How does it impact on urban consolidation? What is the interface between the new technology and the structure of cities of the future?
It's actually massive, and the reason it's massive is because, firstly, it's almost universal that 45 minutes is as long as people like to commute, and I can show you research from all over the world, one way 45. If 45 goes to 65 or 75, that absolutely means that you can almost increase the outward expansion of a city by 50%, and you'll have consumer acceptance. So firstly, a major outward expansion. Secondly, if you can control mobility into your node, and a good example of that would be a shopping centre. So if I had a shopping centre with a very significant car park, I'd be getting as many permits as I could at the moment to increase the size of my car park. Because ultimately what I want to do is I want to have my own fleet. I want to be bringing people to my centre, and I want them to come to my centre to get their car share, and I want to run my ride share out of my shopping centre because I want to control mobility. And if you think about shopping centres and the basic principles, it's the dumbbell theory. You've got discount department store down one end, you've got your department store and your super down the other, and people move between the two. So you want to control the platform, and that's what they'll do, and that's what I would do. So then outside of that, you might have the public sector saying, well, actually, there's some objectives we would like, for example, we can't afford to slaughter the CBD of Sydney anymore, and we will be charging significant amounts of money for AV to come into town, and that will happen too. What will happen as a result of that, there'll be a series of congestion points. And if you think about Sydney and Melbourne, every time there's a major congestion point, so think about going north, out to North Ryde, every time traffic banks up to a certain area, then what happens is you get commercial and residential development because of the commute time principle. But there'll be a new series of congestion points. So I can see a whole lot of new speculative activity, I can see a whole lot of new functionality, and I can actually see mass transit being more important. And so therefore, and for example, I would think that we would need to have very significant car parking, because to match with the shuttles, it depends on what the pricing of a shuttle would be is distinct from a pod. So, and we know from in the United States at the moment, ride share is the same price as public transport, and there's been a 10% mode shift. So it's $2.50 a ride in a ride share, but that's door to door. So it's fascinating and phenomenal. They're sort of initial thoughts. I think it's the kind of forum here today where we start to throw the cards in the air and say, and I'd like to guys like Nigel, who think about how do you restructure cities to do the things you want to do, as distinct from letting the vehicles tell you what they can do. Don't be technology driven.
Well, it's interesting. Nigel and I were in Pana Homes. Remember that in Tokyo? And they have a green leaf car. All their houses were, renewable energy, batteries on the side of them. I'm standing next to Tony Perich. I said, Tony, that's the development of the future. He's gone, what a load of bullshit. It was quite funny but it's happened really quickly. So all of that technology's also been taken up. You look at the Sonnen batteries or Teslas and everything around housing and communities changing enormously. But I think this will shift phenomenally. Now, Chris, over to you. This data and everything, what role, has RICS got a role in any of this? Or is this all about autonomous vehicles? How can we help bring on the change?
Yeah, I think clearly this type of technology is going to have a significant impact on the way in which real estate is owned, developed, designed, occupied, used. So I think there is a very direct impact on the RICS or the profession as it relates to the broader built environment. I think it's a stretch to say that we have a specific role in the sort of automated vehicles standards, but I think clearly there are going to be some standards around the real estate piece that will need to be driven by an organisation like the RICS in terms of the data around potentially, as I say, the sort of the design side, the investment side, occupation, and I guess valuation as well. So I think if you look at the direct impact on surveyors, I think clearly the role of the professional going forward is clearly going to change, and the way in which surveyors are involved in designing, building, managing, valuing projects, I think is something where we need to look very clearly at what is that skill set and what is that role going to be in the future. I think pathways into the RICS are clearly going to need to be looked at. Data scientists, data analytics around real estate, clearly going to be something where we need to have qualifications and standards, so we get some consistency, picking up on all of the issues that have been mentioned by other panellists. And I think in terms of the way in which we work with end users, stakeholders, is also going to be critical to put standards together that are relevant around the built environment, but which are suitable from an owner-investor point of view, because I think there's no point in us coming up with standards around data that are not going to be helpful, useful, and relevant to owners, investors, developers of real estate, and occupiers as well. So I think we do have a role. I think, you know, we need to be clear that it's not specifically around technology standards, but it's going to be around the data and the way in which that technology impacts on the real estate. So I think we sort of have to watch and wait a little bit to see where it's heading, and then look forward over the next 12, 18 months as to where those standards really fit.
Okay, and it can happen pretty quickly.
Yep.
Between 1903 and 1918, or when was it, 1900 and 1950?
That's right.
There was no horses on the road.
Hey, Steve, you can't even get a rezoning in Sydney in 15 years.
I brought my comedian along today. Well done, that's good. No, it's true actually. It's about 12, 13. But, you know, do you think, so what sort of Andrew said and Brian, and it's all about balance, Michelle. Do you think we are going to get this big smash through change overnight, or do you think it's going to be sort of creepy, that creeps in over time? I think it'll be incremental. So you'll all be sitting there working out how to use things, and won't all happen at once.
I think it's going to be a bit of both, actually. I think, I mean, Brian talked about it before, it's essential that we actually set up our systems and frameworks now to make sure that agility and flexibility can happen. So, and it's that sense of there's going to be an awkward teenage period where we've got a whole bunch of things happening at once and trying to get through that to that, you know, mature kind of outcome of particularly what our cities look like. I think there might be a few teething pains along the way to do that. And I think what you're talking about, Brian, so important is just trying to truncate and shorten that period of pain to make sure that we're actually in a space that works. But I think it will mean changing the way that we approach our projects. Projects are getting more complicated. Our stakeholders are more educated and very vocal about the things that they're looking for. So in that complexity, I think we do have to change the way that we deliver some of these projects and the way that we structure them so that they can have that flexibility and agility as things come online. Because we also don't know what's going to happen next, right?
Another thing we found out this morning was that all this money being spent on building this great technology was out of date in a year. Was quite, the redundancy issue is quite interesting. But Andrew, you actually have got my trust, because normally when you put someone on stage who owns a company that's who has automatic buses or driverless buses, they would say that it's the only option.
It's the only option.
It's the only option, but he didn't say that before. You actually said that it's going to be a mixture. You know what I mean? Like there's different uses for different modes. You know, where do you see that going?
Look, absolutely, we see ourselves, the offering that we have at the moment as part of the ecosystem, not the solution in itself. Your question before about whether this is going to be a gradual thing or happen overnight, absolutely a gradual thing, but as Brian said, quicker than people have been saying for some time. We already have automated vehicles on our roads. If you have a vehicle that has adaptive cruise control and lane keeping assistance, that's a level 2 automated vehicle, and it'll just gradually become more and more automated from there. Within probably 10 years, we'll get to the point where we have these stereotypical vehicles that I can call up and it'll come and pick me up and take me where I want to go. It won't be able to handle at that point in time every conceivable situation, but it'll be pretty close enough to get by with day-to-day life. How long that will actually take to become affordable and very commonplace in the fleet is a question, I guess, and a bit hard to know exactly how long that's going to take. But it'll certainly get there, and hopefully our vehicles will be part of it. Yes.
Yeah. Good. Look, Brian, I heard that from a friend of mine that Uber did some work in America, and they sort of work out when it was worth your while to own a car. And already in the American market, unless you do 16,000 kilometres a year, you are better off going with Uber. It's cheaper.
Right.
So, do you think the economics of all of this is going to change within it's going to become a lot cheaper as a result of having these driverless vehicles?
Well, there's one of the issues in Australia is we'll have a different trajectory to the US and to a lot of Europe. The reason for that is we don't have rideshare at the moment. And the reason we don't have rideshare, there's a couple of small companies, but we don't have serious rideshare. But the reason for that is that we just don't have the density of use at the moment. And part of the reason for that is cultural, and that is that, you know, we can, as you can attest in this room, we're barely comfortable with car share. So you're getting to rideshare, which is, you know, people you don't know in the same car. That's another issue. So there's two separate things in this. Firstly, there's a set of cultural criteria, and secondly, there's cost. Now, the cost issue, the importance of the cost issue is that in the United States, if you have a look at the good forecasts, there's a confluence between the scale that you need to get electric vehicles to be viable, because once you make electric vehicles viable, then the costs come down again after no driver. And so what the forecasting shows is that with the introduction, if an Uber, for example, decided to get first 24,000 Volvos and then to get 100,000 electric vehicles, then what you would find is the cost would come down so quickly that that's right, your rider costs, that the ownership of private vehicles would drop dramatically because it just wouldn't be viable. In Australia, however, we wind back to the Australian example, we're just nowhere near that. So what we're most likely to do is have what I would call a private autonomy model, where we're middle class, we've got money, we'll be buying vehicles from China. One on the Beidou network, which is a big Chinese network, you can get open source AV software, open source today for nothing if you want it, because they want to control a platform. They want to sell you things. They want to give you your entertainment. So you see, part of the issue we've got in Australia now that we don't have a car industry is we'll be technology takers. And because of that, our prices could come down dramatically because we're going to be dependent on everybody else. But until the prices come down dramatically in Australia, we're probably likely to have the private autonomy outcome, which is we all buy motor vehicles with level 4 and we pay an extra it'll only be $5,000 extra, according to the OEMs. So, you know, you can either have a sunroof or you can have an automated vehicle. I'm going with a sunroof anyway, but I'm serious, Steve. And so because of that, we've probably got 2 stages. We've probably got 10 years worth of the teenage years you were talking about, Michelle. We've probably got at least 10 years of that until that we get the millennials and the crusty old guys like us really sort of move to the next part and the costs really start to adjust. So it's very time-based. Thinking this through in Australia, if you want to make money out of it in Australia, you've really got to think through the time-based issues.
So I'm sort of going to steal a theme off one of these questions. How are governments going to be motivated to do this? They get billions of dollars every year, speeding fines, traffic infringements. What happens when these don't occur anymore? Like, a government's going to, so you talk about congestion taxes, and I'm sort of sitting here thinking, that's one way they're going to make money. But, you know, how are governments going to embrace this? Have you found them supportive or?
Yeah, you two, because, yeah.
I must say I've just come out of government. Look, government, it's really the safety case which is the driver for government. 90% of traffic accidents are caused by human error, simple as that. And that's a huge cost to the community. So, yes, the automated vehicles will inevitably reduce a lot of the revenue streams that currently come from vehicles. They won't speed, they won't go through red lights, they won't drunk drive, all these sorts of things. So a lot of our revenue streams will get lost. But just like with fuel excise, that's going down as well as our vehicles, how inconsiderate they're being more fuel economical. But so there would definitely need to be new revenue streams for provision of road infrastructure, and broad-based road user charging is, in my opinion, pretty much inevitable in some form or another. And it doesn't need to be any more expensive than we're paying at the moment through other mechanisms. But my personal view is that that's the only way to go.
It's hard to be more expensive. We're the most expensive tolls we have the most expensive tolls in the world, and also the most expensive parking.
Yeah, well, that's right.
You go to Europe, they apologise for charging you $25 a day. You park in Martin Place, and it costs you 130 a day.
Well, I was interested at Brian's comment earlier about buying up a parking station. I would have thought that when automated vehicles come online, they'll be looking to reduce costs in a number of areas. We've talked about reducing costs in the driver situation, but why would they park in a parking station that costs lots of money when they can drive around by themselves
Yeah, drop
cheaper?
and drive.
So, yeah, I'm not sure if I agree with you there, Brian.
No, that's okay because not many people agree with much, but you see, as an economist, you've got to forecast time into this. And what I think is there'll be two separate stages. The first stage will be level 4. We'll be sitting behind the wheel, and it won't be automated. It won't be taxi bot, robot.
Yeah.
And so therefore, in this first, and it could be, let's call it 10 years. I think it'll be around 10. There'll be more cars on the road because of the ease at which you can actually drive. And so therefore, the car parks have got 10 more years worth of really good money because there'll be more vehicles on the road. Now, then that's because if you can work for an hour, if you can seriously work for an hour in your vehicle, what's that worth to you? And how much more are you prepared to pay for car space? And I'm happy with the price elasticity in there. After that, what I'd be doing, if I was the car parks, and this is what I said, I'd be actually getting as many permits as I could to get as much car parking as I could. I'd be running my own fleet out of the car park. So I'd try to become nodal. So, because ultimately, and I think you're right, if you could run vehicles on the road 24 hours a day, and EVs you probably could, do you really want to park them in an expensive location? But you do want but you do want people to be able to hail the vehicle, which leads me to this question about how do you control things? Because one of the issues, and you really do have to buy the book and read it because it's very good, but roads become real estate, Steve. So the road itself becomes real estate because if for example, your fleet can circulate 24 hours a day on a road and therefore avoid having to pay for any base, does Domino's really want to have Domino's pizzas? Why don't we just have pizza vans running around making pizzas? Why would I want to pay rent for anything? And so what will happen here is that the smart money will actually begin to use roads as real estate until the public sector cottons onto the concept that actually we own them. We actually own the roads. So if you're going to use roads as real estate, then we want you to pay some rent. Now, the thinking that sits behind that, therefore, means that this is where that sort of intuitive thinking about institutional reform is so important, because it is congestion charging at a point, but it's a lot more than that. It is much, much more than that. Because the second part in this is really important, and that is that mobility as a service platform should be franchised. Because if we give people access to our data, we should expect something back. We should expect the data to be correct. I don't want a mobility as a service platform taking me to work and showing me every billboard. I want that to take me to work the way I want to go to work. So there are massive issues in how we think all this through. And I guess the importance of forums like today is to start to throw the cards up in the air and say, well, okay, what's the next step?
So, Michelle, with your developments, what are you doing to accommodate this potential? Like, is Lend-Lease doing anything with respect to, charging stations? One, it's pretty straightforward. Or are they doing anything with respect to different approaches to looking at parking and mobility and car ownership?
I think we're looking at things on a project-by-project basis at the moment. There's been, we pride ourselves on being innovative, so we're looking at various innovations, but they are very contextually based. And so it kind of depends on what community you're in and what environment you're in as to how available or accessible they are at the moment.
And I think that's a point Tony Perich was making to me in Japan as well. I don't think he could have built houses to the price that he wanted in Oran Park, or to the same specification as Sekisui were making them, or Pana Homes were making them.
I think that's it's also because we're in an iterative and innovative space. So we're all learning as we do these things at the same time. I think your point about real estate is really interesting, because I have heard before that there's the concern about autonomous vehicles is this idea that it's cheaper to move around in an autonomous vehicle than it is to rent. So it becomes an issue with homeless people and affordability.
That is weird. was sort of looking at the run sheet.
I think
just
I've heard
that.
Brian say that before.
Yeah, so
Somewhere else.
we'll fix the homeless problem by having them going around the city in cars.
I didn't say that, no. No, but it has been said, Michelle, and I've actually read that before.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know, I can't recall where I heard
Yeah,
it.
no, I've
saw
seen-
it,
I've
but
seen,
I have
yeah.
seen it.
So, Chris, I'll throw you. What do we do about it? This is a hard question. So what can RICS do? I think it's sort of like similar to the first one, but
Yep.
I was sitting here thinking, well, do we engage with local government? Do we engage with the state government? So what are the things that we can actually do to help create the future?
Well, I think given our role in terms of, the fact that we cover the full cross-section of the built environment, I think there are a number of things we can do. I think one is dialogue with policymakers and the government side, because I think this inevitably is going to need some government leadership in terms of the framework and how it's evolving. So I think using the sort of umbrella that we have across all the various markets and then trying to come up with some thought leadership, some best practice, some of the sort of trends that we're seeing, and then engaging with the public sector on what does this mean and how can some of these frameworks be taken forward, I think is one key area. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think the other is to work with developers and investors much more closely in terms of identifying what we think these trends are as an industry or as a profession, and getting that out there into the market in terms of consulting people, talking to people, creating forums around it so that we can start to move to a more mature stage of what does it actually mean. Because I think we're also acknowledging that we know something's coming, but we're not entirely sure exactly what the implications are going to be. So I think we can play that sort of thought leadership, advocacy type role, policy formulation type role, working with stakeholders.
Please put your hands together for the panel. Thank you very much, guys. And,